So, Jason, what would you say are your biggest takeaways this time around from the book of James?
Yeah, I have preached through James 3 times, I think. I've taught it in Sunday school once or twice. I spent a lot of time with it in college, just kind of studying it and working through it, meditating on it a lot. And I think the big takeaway, honestly, for me this time, probably not surprising if you've been listening on this, is just the relationship between the Sermon on the Mount and James.
Yeah,
Um, that was the surprising, just about every week, is seeing that relationship. And I think some of that's because of the way that we did the Bible reading. I think the other thing that really stands out to me is just how various James is. He's diverse in his
yeah,
treatments of life. It's a robust, well-rounded, holistic faith, lived out in community, but also personalized. Not just losing yourself in community, but being your Christian self in community. From the very beginning, he tells them to count it all but joy, my brothers, addressing them
yeah,
corporately. But then he talks to them about ways in which they are to show their faith and have joy when they face trials. And that very beginning of the book, the brotherhood relationship, and also the don't expect that life's going to be easy.
yeah,
I was actually reading a book in preparation for our next sermon series over the last week or so, and it talked about how we often anticipate that life's going to be easy, and we complain to God when life isn't easy, as if we deserve life to be easy,
yeah,
as if His servants' lives have always been easy, and as if we are the abnormality when we have trials in our life. And he didn't go back to it, but going back to it from James, that reminder when you meet trials of various kinds, to count it joy
yeah,
in the Lord. So it's hard to nail down James.
yeah, for sure.
What stood out? Yes, it all stood out, and it's something that I'd love to preach through again and let God continue to shape me in. How about you?
Yeah, a big thing for me this time around was how much James has in mind similar conceptions to what Peter and Paul have about the flow of like history. There's little sprinkles here and there where he's thinking about their destiny in Christ, to be freed from sin a little bit and making it to the end. I've often viewed James as kind of like Proverbs, but in the New Testament,
Hmm.
and he's really demonstrating this interconnectedness. The apostles have this clear vision from Christ of this is the age we're in. This what the culmination of all history will be like. Therefore, pursue these things. And that was even more so to me with his call there and at the end, and just thinking about like finally like his kind of last teaching thing before he smatters through a bunch of wise things to do in the community is like persevere to the end, get there because the Lord's coming is at hand. This immediacy
Hmm.
of the Lord is coming. And I don't normally think about James as because the Lord is standing at the door, ready
Hmm.
to come through, do these things. It's more like, you probably shouldn't favor the rich over the poor because God sees the heart.
Hmm.
And you probably should not lean on your own wisdom,
Hmm.
like those kind of things that we can so easily make to be trite.
Hmm.
Uh, and it's far from that. And I'm always just bushwhacked by how poorly I control my tongue in various ways.
Hmm.
So anytime that comes around, I'm like, I don't know if I want to read that again.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a big one for me.
Yeah. I think it's almost impossible to read through James and be like, yes, I
Yeah,
achieved it all this time.
yeah, perfect score.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
scored well today.
yeah,
Um, I love the way that you framed that for us, that James isn't just a book on things to do. It's about locating ourselves in the story of God, or God's story.
Yeah.
And you brought up a couple weeks ago, locating ourselves amongst the people of God.
Mm-hmm.
So that recap of James, it's not just isolated things to do. It's truly a faith that we practice, not just practices,
Yeah.
but faith as the locating ourselves in God's story by faith. By faith, Abraham, and by faith, we also. By faith, Elijah prayed, and by faith, Christ prayed, and by the faith of Christ, we stand right with God in faith. So, locating ourselves in the story of God as we practice faith, and locating ourselves amongst the people of God as we practice faith. I've titled James a few things throughout the years, but I've talked about active faith. I've talked about practicing faith. I don't remember. I think I called it active Christianity one time. I think practicing faith is probably my new favorite where I'm going to land on James. But I'm confident in 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 years, I'll probably be preaching it through and be seeing God work in me. It's probably the book I've preached the most and studied the most. Just out of curiosity, what book do you think of the Bible have you probably spent the most time studying, teaching, processing?
Yeah. Well, in music world, it's the Psalms,
Yeah.
because like you're just gonna get around to the songbook the most, and that can be a hindrance sometimes, because if you're not fully connected to God's story about the way in which the Psalms are actually commenting on that,
Mhm.
or looking ahead to other things that are promised, and so you kind of get hunkered down out of the context of not having a good biblical theology, basically. Um, Coming around to saying, here's these other right things that we should say right now, and seemingly have no connection to the beginning point and the end point. So probably most of the Psalms. Beyond that, for me personally, in recent days, I probably spent the most time working in Mark, because I just have a new appreciation for the Gospel of Mark. It's simplicity in some ways, but like to me, it feels like you want to understand uh, the way the New Testament writers are looking at the Old Testament, the way they understand Jesus' ministry in light of the book of Isaiah and the prophecies in Malachi and such. That's a great one to begin with, and because it seems like a clearer version of like, I don't want to say modern storytelling, but I kind of do think of it in those terms, where there are vignettes
Mhm.
of what Christ is doing, and it's kind of like a story cycle of, this is what the Messiah is. Here's these two aspects of it. Here's how generally the first half of the book is going to explain that first half, and generally how the second half of the book is going to explain that second half. And I've just been really attracted to that. So that would be the one for me.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. Um, well, to wrap us up, I want to go from James 1:2 to James 5:19, the second verse of the book and the second to last. James 1:2, count it all joy, my brothers, when you encounter various trials. And then James 5:19, in the context of those that are struggling and suffering with sickness, sometimes because of sin, sometimes because of living in a broken world. James says, my brothers, if anyone among you wanders from the truth and someone brings him back, let him know whoever brings back a sinner from his wandering will save his soul from death and cover a multitude of sins. Let's recognize that we personally, I myself don't always count it joy when I encounter trials, and that other believers don't always count it joy when they encounter trials. But let's come alongside our brothers in their suffering to pray that they do count it all joy, and then to come alongside them, even if they have wandered from the truth, questioning the goodness of God or not practicing as they should in the midst of suffering. Let's be a people who personally count it joy because we know the story of God, and who pursue others as our in the community of God, that they wouldn't wander from the truth and that they would count it all joy.
Absolutely, because I keep coming back to that little bit of phrase there, a little bit before in chapter 5.
Mm-hmm.
Like, for you have seen the purpose of the Lord, how the
Mm-hmm.
Lord is compassionate and merciful.
Yep. That's the God we serve, and that's the one that we practice our faith in.